Hello and welcome to your first video lecture. If you've never done one of these before, basically I'm going to lecture over slides just like I would in class. Instead, I'm not doing this in class. You're doing it on your own time. Please feel free to pause the video when needed, okay? And write down whatever notes you need to take. And you can rewind, do whatever you need to do so you can go at your own pace and get your notes down. One thing you should know is that while you have like access to this video and the slides now, you will not have access to these during your quizzes. So anything you might want to know on a quiz, you'll want to jot down in your notes, okay? All right, so let's get started here. Today we're going to be talking about cells and DNA and just doing a basic overview / review because theoretically you've all already learned about this, okay? You've learned about it at the very least in freshman biology and maybe also in some other classes you might have taken, human A&P, perhaps AP Bio. So this is just a little review refresher looking at what cells are and the structure of DNA. Cell, it's a word you hear a lot about, especially in a life science class. And so let's just break it down really simple. What is a cell? A cell is the basic building block of any living thing. Plants, animals, whatever, bacteria, you name it, they're all made of cells, okay? And cells have itty bitty little parts in them. These parts are called organelles that carry out different functions. And the organelles do different things. Some organelles digest, some organelles like make proteins, some organelles will generate cellular power. And you might have remembered learning about all these organelles in freshman bio and having to memorize all that they do, like mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. Remember that one? We're not going to be focusing on that necessarily. Just a reminder that cells have parts called organelles that do things, but you're not going to be responsible for memorizing all the organelles, okay? But just refresh your brain, okay, that exists. And there are two main types of cells, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. So we're going to get a little bit more into each one of those next. That word can trip people up, prokaryotic, okay, or prokaryotes. This is a general term for a group of two different kinds of organisms, either bacteria or archaea. A lot of you probably have a good sense of bacteria. You've heard of bacteria before. If you come down with some bacteria, sometimes you'll take antibiotics to get it out of your system, okay? Archaea, though, that's one that a lot of people haven't heard of. This is like a super primitive life form, like the little critters living in deep sea hydrothermal vents. Those are archaea, okay? So we have bacteria, we have archaea. They're both prokaryotes, and all prokaryotes, no matter what type it is, bacteria or archaea, they're all unicellular, meaning the whole organism, the whole thing is one cell big. That's it. That's all. Okay, whereas we are like billions, trillions, quadrillions of cells, this whole living thing is just one cell. Okay, let's look at some of the features of a prokaryote. They're all surrounded by a cell wall on the outside, and right inside that cell wall is a cell membrane. Sometimes that cell membrane is called the plasma membrane. Okay, they're synonyms. Okay, there is no nucleus in a prokaryote. Okay, they do have DNA, but the DNA is just free floating in the cytoplasm. Remember, the cytoplasm is like the liquidy goo that fills up your cell. It just free floats. One interesting thing is that in a prokaryote, bacteria is typically one singular strand, okay? So it's just one huge circle. Okay, sometimes I might have a couple little side circles, but the chromosomes are circular in nature, okay? They also have some little things called ribosomes. They help make proteins. And then because they're unicellular, one cellular beings, they need some way to get around. And that would be through little hair-like structures, either called cilia, which can be on the outside, or flagella, like a little tail that can help it zip around. Okay, so they're pretty simple. Very few organelles, right? And one thing I know, like bacteria get a bad rap. Like when you think of bacteria, you think of the stuff that you have to take antibiotics for. Maybe strep throat, that's a bacteria. E. coli, right? You can get that from maybe some not so good food. And those are not good. We don't want those. But there's lots of helpful bacteria that are living in your body right now. They actually live in our digestive tract and allow us to digest all the foods that we can. So bacteria is good. It also helps us make cheese and yogurt. So not all bacteria is bad. Just some of it makes us sick. All right, so eukaryotic cells now, these are going to be anything like a protist. What's a protist? Right here, amoeba, algae, paramecium, if you've heard of those things. Those are protists. They're one cellular, okay? They're unicellular, meaning they're just one cell big. Here's an amoeba, but they're gonna have lots of different organelles inside them. They're gonna be a whole lot more complex inside that one cell. Okay, we've also got fungi, fungus, mushrooms, that type of thing, all animals and all plants. Like fungi, animals, and plants, those are all going to be multicellular, and the protists are going to be unicellular. So eukaryotic cells can be either single-celled or multicellular. And here, just flashback to freshman bio, right? Here's a simplified picture of an animal cell and all of the organelles it has. And here's a simplified picture of a plant cell and all the organelles it has. One of the main things that we're just going to focus on here would be that you don't really see DNA pictured here, and that's because the DNA is kept in the nucleus, okay? Both a plant and an animal cell have a nucleus, so do protists. You can't see it there, but they do. So that's where DNA is stored in eukaryotes, okay? And then the other thing we're just going to pay attention to would be what surrounds them. Well, an animal cell has a cell membrane around it. A plant cell has a cell membrane and then a cell wall around it, okay? And then animal cells have ribosomes, those little things that make proteins, and plant cells have ribosomes, those little things that make proteins, okay? So we've got some similarity in structures here, but we've also got some differences, which leads me to, okay, let's think back now. What do prokaryotes and eukaryotes have in common? Take a minute, jot down some ideas, pause the video, and when you're ready, you can push play and see if you got them all. Here's what I was able to come up with. They both have cell membranes around the outside of them. They both have cytoplasm. They both got genetic info, their DNA, somewhere inside. They both have ribosomes. Plant cells and prokaryotes both have cell walls. And you know what, I might not have mentioned this, but eukaryotic cells, some of them have structures like flagella and cilia too. Like your intestines have cilia to move food on the digestive tract. Sperm cells have flagella, that's how they get around. So they both have some way to be mobile. So now let's think of how are they different. Again, pause the video, take a minute, jot down what makes these two different cell types different. Here's what I came up with. Prokaryotes don't have a nucleus. Typically, the genetic info in a prokaryote is a single strand of circular DNA. And prokaryotes have very few organelles. And size. I didn't talk about this either, but something you should know. Prokaryotes, because they're unicellular and only unicellular, are teeny tiny, itty bitty. Whereas eukaryotes tend to be much bigger, right? Think of a plant. A plant is huge. A plant has trillions, quadrillions of cells. A human and polar bear has so many cells. And so typically eukaryotes, unless you're a single cellular protist, are going to be way bigger than prokaryotes. Okay, so now we've had a good refresher about cells. Let's now move on to DNA. Okay, so both prokaryotes and eukaryotes have DNA. And so now we're going to take a little bit closer look at the structure of DNA. Hopefully this will help you wake up your brain and remember what you've learned in other classes. So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And what is DNA? It's a molecule, okay? And this molecule contains a genetic code, which are instructions for how living things develop and function, okay? And as it turns out, these instructions are entirely related to proteins. The instructions are, here's how you make this protein, here's how you make that protein, here's how you make another protein, because as it turns out, in organisms, proteins are what does the work, and proteins are what make up structures. So as it turns out, when we say, oh, you know, DNA is the blueprints for life. Yeah, but really DNA are the blueprints for proteins, because proteins do all of the things, okay? And the DNA, as I mentioned, is located in the nucleus in eukaryotic cells, or it is free floating in the cytoplasm in prokaryotic cells. Now, if we zoom in on this, we're going to get even smaller. So I said DNA is a molecule. By definition, a molecule is made up of different things inside of it. Okay. You can kind of think of DNA as like a freight train. Okay, you know how like a freight train has a whole bunch of train cars attached one after the other after the other? That's DNA. It's a whole bunch of like building block pieces attached to each other. And the big long completed thing is the strand of DNA. Okay, so now let's look at the building blocks, at the individual freight cars of your DNA. And that is called a nucleotide. Okay, and over here is like a general picture of a nucleotide. Okay, this is the individual building block, the individual train car. So a nucleotide has a phosphate group. It has one 5-carbon sugar. Notice 5 carbons, 5 sides. Hey, hey. One 5-carbon sugar called deoxyribose. That's where DNA gets its name from. Cool. And then it has a nitrogen base. It's not actually a square. But this base, there's 4 different bases, A, T, C, and G. So this whole thing right here is one nucleotide. And if we put a bunch of nucleotides together, we get a strand of DNA. So let's look at our nucleotides here. A, so if A were right here, that A thing is called adenine. And adenine actually is right here. It's a double ring structure. And adenine always bonds with thymine. Okay, here's thymine right here. It is a single ring structure. They always bond together. Okay, now we have some fancy pants science words for double rings and single rings. Anything that's a single ring is called a pyrimidine, and anything that's a double ring is called a purine. The way that I remember that are purines are pure as gold, pure AG, pure as gold, okay? And with gold, do you want a lot of rings or little rings? If it's gold, I want lots of rings. So the purines are my double rings, and they're pure as gold. Okay, and the pyrimidines are just the other two. So that, if that helps you remember it, that's how I remember it. Okay, so you have adenine and thymine there. They always bond together. And then we have cytosine, single ring pyrimidine, and it always bonds with guanine, double ring purine. Okay, so this is very important that A always pairs with T, C always pairs with G. And the way that I remember this, the way that I learned it in school when I was a freshman, was a 2-car garage. A 2-car garage. A goes with T, C goes with G. Maybe that'll help you remember. Okay, so those are bases. And then just to be really clear here, here in the circle, in this dashed circle, this is a nucleotide. So that's one. And then over here would be another. And then here's another nucleotide. Here's another one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 nucleotides shown in this picture. We link them together, they make a DNA molecule. Okay. Last little bit about structure here. DNA comes in a double helix shape. Think of this like a twisted ladder or a coil or like a slinky type of thing. Okay, and it's got what we call rails and rungs. The rails are going to be right here. It's the sugar phosphate backbone. So notice we got a phosphate connected to the sugar, the deoxyribose, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, alternating. And then here it is on the other side, boop, 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 alternating. So this is like forming this part right here, and forming this part right here, okay, so that's our sugar phosphate backbone. It goes around the outside. It's like the part that twists. If you were thinking about a ladder, this is the part of the ladder that goes up and down. Okay. Also, this backbone is negatively charged, which is going to become important later when we talk about some biotech stuff. Okay. And then the rungs, if you're thinking about a ladder, the parts that go side to side, the parts that your feet would step on. Okay, these are our nitrogen bases, our A's, T's, and C's, and G's. They go in the middle. Okay, they are held together by hydrogen bonds, a special type of bonding you might have learned about in chemistry if you've already taken chemistry. And one thing to note is that between C and G, there are 3 hydrogen bonds, here shown by 3 different lines. And between A and G, there are 2, shown by 2 different lines, because that's where the bonding attraction lines up. So if we're looking here, right here in the middle, here's our nitrogen bases, here's our rungs, okay? And then here is the sugar phosphate backbone, sugar phosphate backbone. One thing to know is that our sugar phosphate backbones end up running what's called anti-parallel. So if you think parallel are, two parallel lines, you guys all know that. But anti-parallel means that one of them is flipped upside down, like the Fresh Prince, okay? One of them is flipped upside down. And if you'll notice in this diagram, you can see here, this one, like the P's and the S's and the C's and the G's and the A's and the T's are all right side up. But look at this one. Oh, it's upside down, okay? Because that's how in real life it is. They are connected in the middle, but this left-hand side, they're all connected to each other, the right side up. This right-hand side, they're all connected to each other, they're upside down. And then they are held together weakly in the middle with these hydrogen bonds. Think of it kind of like a coat zipper, right? You got like the teeth part that goes on the left side of your coat and like the little teeth part that goes on the right side of your coat. And then your zipper runs up and down to like connect them. Like this is where your zipper would run up and down to connect them. Does that make sense? Maybe. I hope so. Okay, so that is what you need to know about DNA structure and base pairing and what a molecule of DNA looks like, and also what you need to know in general about cells.